In 1987, the NFL experienced an event that would seem insane to fans today. All NFL players agreed to refuse to suit up and take the field after week 2 of the season. NFL teams found themselves with no players to take the field, and soon were hiring insurance salesmen to fill the roles of starting players. But how did this event even come to fruition? Today on FootballLore, we explore the 1987 NFL player strike and its impact on the game today. Going into the 1987 year, the NFL was in a period of change. Television rights had become absolutely massive for the league, and it had shifted from a low-margin business most people ran out of passion to a seriously profitable enterprise. The only problem is the bargaining agreement with the player union still hadn't been updated. Free agency would seem insane now for comparison. In order for a player to change teams, the team they were going to would have to pay a hefty transfer fee. This meant that most players spent their careers entirely with the team that drafted them and kept salaries artificially low. If companies had to compensate teams for free agents, they would usually try to offset that cost by reducing player money. This basically created a system where teams could lock players into low deals and keep them on teams. The only reason salaries were increasing was because of competition from the USFL. The new football league had begun to pay players insanely inflated salaries, and the competition forced NFL teams to start paying more. The players noticed this and began to demand rule changes to free agency to create a better environment for player salaries. The NFL had experienced a strike just 5 years earlier, in 1982, for many of the same reasons. Players had waited 2 games into the season before going on strike and wiping 7 games off of the calendar. This did have an impact on negotiations, and players were given increased salaries due to the increased earnings of the league. However, it was still not enough to satisfy the players. Players still were not being compensated fairly compared to the revenue they were generating. But owners were still furious about the stoppage of play that had taken place earlier. When rumors of a strike started swirling around in the 1987 season, the owners decided they were not going to let the strike derail the season and would push through regardless of if players striked or not. One of the main things the players were willing to strike over was access to health care. At the time, there were no medical benefits guaranteed to NFL players. This is insane now with what we know about brain injuries and how hard the sport is on your body. But all of these demands directly affected the owners' bottom line, and they decided to dig their heels in as hard as possible. As soon as rumors of a strike became serious, following the second week of the 1987 season, 19 NFL owners began looking for players that could replace the talent on the roster. This led to the Players Association becoming even more sure of their decision to go on strike. After all, they knew that there was no way these replacement players would be able to provide a quality product the way professionals could. The NFL players, however, underestimated the resolve of billionaires to hang on to their money. There were some stars who were willing to play through the strike, and this greatly hindered the strike's effectiveness. Players like Joe Montana, Steve Largent, and Mark Gastineau decided to break solidarity with the other players and play through the strike. The third week of the 1987 season was canceled due to many teams not being able to field players. But once stars like Joe Montana broke the picket line, it became clear to the owners they could wait out the strike. The TV networks that were now making up a majority of the league's revenue also didn't really seem too bothered by the strike. Viewership had dropped 20% through the beginning of the strike, but considering that the league was printing money, this was still generating a hefty profit for all parties involved. The teams were able to fill their rosters by offering open tryouts to anyone willing to suit up and play on the field. Teams were rumored to be offering people off the street $4,000 a week to play. That translates to about $10,000 a week today. This is much lower than they were having to pay star players at the time, but also was a ton better than normal jobs at the time. This led to plenty of individuals literally lining up for a chance to wear a Philadelphia Eagles uniform, even if it meant undermining the players who were currently on strike. It wasn't like the league was as profitable as they could have been, but they just had to wait out the players. There was a large drop in attendance, but this wasn't really hurting the bottom line of owners the way it needed to. The advertising revenue continued to roll in, and owners were in a situation where they were still going to turn a small profit on the season, despite the players' best efforts. The wind in the strike's sails slowly faded away as they realized while being morally in the right is great, billionaires don't care unless you hit their wallet. The players were absolutely right in principle. They did deserve more money, they did deserve health care, and the free agency system did suck, but they simply simply could not afford to hold out if the NFL was willing to finish the season with scabs. As more star players began to cross back across the picket line, it became obvious that the star players were going to keep their jobs, and the lower quality players would just be replaced. So after 4 weeks, the strike ended. While this entire saga had launched over a demand to rework the free agent market, none of the demands of the players were met. The negotiating position of the players was simply not strong enough to make any demands. This isn't us saying that they deserve to lose. It is just the way history went down. When push came to shove, the players needed to get paid, and the owners had no incentive to cave. The players returned to play to close out the season, but it didn't mean they gave up their fight entirely. They continued to collect their salaries and play on the field, but turned more of their attention to the courtroom side of things. Individual players began to file lawsuits against the league in December of 1987, citing a complete abuse of labor regulation in regards to free agency. This initial lawsuit was dismissed, but eventually would come to a head in the case of NFL versus McNeil, where former Jets running back Freeman McNeil would win a judgment that declared the current NFL policies regarding free agency as against antitrust regulations. This judgment in 1992 finally made the NFL face the facts that their system was going to be dismantled legally unless they made changes. A new collective bargaining agreement was agreed to between players and the league in 1993. This agreement created the free agency system we know today, where players who are free agents can negotiate with any NFL team regardless of location, and introduced a salary cap system to assure no team could just buy the best players on the market. This system is still how the league primarily works to this day. The franchise tag system was also introduced, and revenue sharing was implemented to make sure that all teams had an equal footing when it came to hiring players. Before this, if your team had the larger market, you just had more money to spend on talent, and competitive fairness across the league was much lower. Players were also awarded much-deserved medical benefits, pensions, severance packages, and minimum salaries that made the risk to their bodies worth it. The league was bringing in billions at this point, and while owners were not happy to give up any of their money, there was no way they could just replace the star players with scabs another time around. While 1993 was a huge success for the players, there were still some demands that were turned down entirely. Negotiations have never been made fully public, but it's assumed that the system we have today is more a middle ground of the original demands made by the players. Negotiations were rumored to have been extremely heated. The NFLPA was reestablished shortly after this new CBA was agreed to, and serves to this day to make sure that player needs are represented. The days of being able to easily replace star players is long gone, and while tensions have flared up several times since 1987, it has never gotten to the point where players straight up refuse to take the field. The most recent flare-up took place in 2011, when another agreement was set to be negotiated. While crossing a picket line is not good in terms of labor rights, it is really hard to hold the people who wanted to play during the strike fully accountable. If you were offered nearly $10,000 a week to play for the Eagles or the Cowboys, you probably would find yourself putting on pads as well. While the replacement players did only play 3 games, there were some iconic stories to come out of it. Players like Mike Hohensee would jump over from the Canadian Football League and have performances that would leave even the most loyal NFL fans excited. All of these have a huge asterisk next to them though, considering they weren't playing against NFL level talent. It's a confusing period in NFL history where everyone wants to cheer for the everyday men on the field, but they're only there because billionaires didn't want to pay for football players' health care. Overall, 1987 will always go down as one of the more bizarre in NFL history, and the results set the stage for the league we know and love today. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to press the like button and let us know in the comment section what NFL story you would like to see next. Our last video was about Marvin Harrison Jr., exploring if he has what it takes to really be elite in the NFL. Click on screen now to watch it.